He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday and Friday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content such as interviews and D&D campaigns at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues, Campfire Clues. I am your host Taylor, and today we're going to be diving back into some underground cave networks. Not limited to only North America, though. We're going to be going across the pond and exploring some European ones. But before we get into that, a couple of plugs. You can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, our Patreon, where you get ad-free exclusive early episodes, including our new series arc that Ruben has been spearheading, the Haunt of the Grassman campaign that he has constructed. Is a fantastic time. Definitely check it out, because we had our first episode drop on our live feeds, and the other episodes we're thinking probably will be a timed exclusive for now. Maybe we'll release them later out to the public, but as of right now, they're only going to be on our Patreon. And Ruben's just put in so much work into those. It's an absolute stellar of a time. I'm enjoying it so far when I get to experience this. He's constructed everything from the ground up. It's truly, truly wonderful. And you can also find us with our email, CryptidClues@gmail.com. If you want to send us a message, say hi, you want to share any stories, by all means, shoot us an email. But without further ado, let's get into this. So we talked about cave networks before. In another episode, I dove into them across North America, and I took a few minutes to explore the possibility of them being used as underground highways by cryptids. Now, cryptids aren't limited to North America, of course, and this possibility of underground highways can, in theory, exist anywhere. Now, I'm not implying a hollow earth theory with this, per se, but think more a few hundred feet in scale than being deep in the Earth's core. And with that, to our knowledge, only a few countries are set up with a plethora of caves in all of Europe. One country of intriguing note is none other than Slovakia, with more than 6,200 caves, and only around 400 of them have actually been thoroughly explored and mapped out. Funny enough, a few men were out hiking in Slovakia a few years ago. They stumbled upon what they call an invisible cave, located in the forest near the village of Borka in Slovakia. These three individuals were Robert Nemedi, Estevan Galay, and Tibor Balint. And as per Estevan, efforts were taken to map out the cave network, but because of how large it proved to be, the attempts were therefore disbanded. These three individuals claim that the cave was so well hidden in the forest that finding entrance points is nearly impossible. The locals claim that the cave was formed by underwater rivers that flowed down the hillside hundreds of thousands of years ago, and many of the tunnels and passageways flowing throughout the tunnel were exceedingly narrow, which resulted in navigating them to be exceptionally difficult. Specific details account for the first initial 20 meters being so narrow that these three individuals had to slide on their backs to actually fit. After about 50 meters, the cave actually opened up into a massive room, and through this room, several even more narrow pathways spread in all directions. Now, this is important because since it was discovered quite recently, it's worth mentioning that the Earth is extremely unexplored. Maybe on land it's another story, but underground and underwater, you can bet that new locations are discovered all the time. Now, another thing of interest is how this cave goes from a narrow point to a large opening chamber to what appears to be tons of pathways everywhere. Now, again, I did an episode on the Grand Canyon not too long ago, and there were some reports where people found these underground cave systems that had much more of a refined kind of approach to it. It wasn't more naturally formed, but they suspected these were areas that were carved out by pre-existing civilizations. But nonetheless, it was tons and tons and tons of plethora, again, of just cave networks and systems just flowing out in all directions. But I digress. However, another important note, kind of in association with areas that have not been discovered, and again, this is kind of my go-to that I mentioned before, is in China, there was a giant sinkhole that was discovered last year with a massive forest inside it. This sinkhole was about 630 feet deep and has a ton of ancient plant life, and many researchers suspect undiscovered species as well. And that's just a prime example of new subterranean areas that are just being discovered in more recent times. So I'm going to give you a visualization now. So let's imagine a tree in the ground. You lift that tree up high and it pulls out all the roots from the dirt. You can see this massive amount and plethora of roots spreading in all angles and directions. Perhaps some roots intertwine with other roots from nearby plants and trees. There's your cave network. And I don't doubt that it could be anything less than that, really, in theory. I mean, the surface of the planet has undergone massive amounts of change, from scorching heat to freezing ice ages, and the Earth is in constant change, and things would learn to find sanctuary below ground, away from the surface. Now, not permanently, of course, but temporarily. We know animals have migratory paths they adhere to throughout the year. Heck, look at birds. It's a prime example. And I believe this can be adapted to select species and cryptids that learned migratory paths via underground networks. Paths that get passed down through generations, either by instinct or actual memory and instruction. However, moving back into Europe, let's give you guys an example of how large a scale we're dealing with. What's called the Grotte de Frassassi, I hope I'm saying that right, it is the largest underground cave system in all of Europe. It extends for over 35 kilometers and has rock formations dating back to over 180 million years ago. That's an awfully long time for a prehistoric species to explore and map it out before we do. The caves didn't open to the public until 1974, however. Now, in terms of depth, this cave sets the record thus far, clocking in at 2,212 meters, which is 7,257 feet. The Verovkina Cave, hope I'm saying that correctly, that's what it's called, and it's located in the Arabica Massif in Abkhazia, which is a breakaway region of Georgia that is supported by Russia. Now, I talked about lava tubes before, which are tunnels that naturally form after lava flows through them, but definitely check out pictures of them as they are quite spectacular. But lava isn't the only thing that forms tunnels. Water is equally guilty. And the Earth houses many subterranean rivers which flow through cave systems, sometimes disappearing through sinkholes, then continuing underground even further before eventually reappearing above ground, thus giving us an entrance ages later to a network. Now, I'm going to hone in on the UK here. I actually found out that a large portion of caves found in the United Kingdom are still unexplored. There's a famous man in the field of cave exploration by the name of Andy Sewell, claims that there is around 60 miles of caves which we know are there but haven't found. The deepest cave in the UK can be found in the Upper Swansea Valley, which leads into a massive network. This network is still largely unexplored, but is famous nonetheless. Going down roughly 275 meters, there's only about 50 kilometers worth of passage that people know of, and more parts are still being discovered to this day. The first 100 meters start out wide and tall, so many large things could easily fit through, and at the heart of the main cave is an underground stream relating to the point we spoke to earlier about subterranean rivers. So I got some bullet point cave systems I'm going to sound off here, so get ready. We have the, and I apologize on my pronunciation, Shuanghedong Cave Network. It's 311.5 kilometers. It's in China, and this was discovered in 1988. We have the Optimistikna Cave, which is 264.5 kilometers. This is in Ukraine, discovered in 1966. We have the Holok system, It kind of sounds like a Star Wars, the Mustafar system, but no, Hollock, 208 kilometers. Switzerland, discovered in 1875. Then we have the Sistema del Alto Tehuelo, which is 177.5 kilometers, found in Spain, and discovered in 1965. All of these incredible cave systems have been found not so long ago, with an ever-increasing array of new tunnels and entrances being discovered. I have another place I want to hone in on, though, however, being the White Mountains, which form that natural frontier between Pakistan and Afghanistan. These mountains extend westward for around 100 miles and are home of several complex cave systems. But before I get into that, I'm just going to jump to a quick ad break and be right back. And we're back. Now, many of these networks were inhabited by people during the invasion of the Soviet Union in the 1980s, and again in the next few decades post 9/11 when the United States arrived. A lot of battles unfolded there in some of these caves, but much of the cave system remains unexplored and unmapped. I'm sure you recall a certain Pakistan cryptid that Ruben and I covered a while ago, Barmanu. It's worth deep diving into those 2 episodes we did covering that cryptid, as well as Jordy McGraner's research. We get into a whole arsenal of information associated with that cryptid. It is a very, very good discussion. But let's say, and of course this is extremely hypothetical, but what if underground passageways existed between the White Mountains and the Himalayas? Bold claim, I know, and I have zero evidence to support such a report. But I wanted to bring this to everyone's attention because in the Himalayas, we have around 10,000 or more man-made caves that were dug in 2,000 years ago. These caves still remain an archaeological mystery today, with exploration not beginning until the mid-1990s. Of course, there's dozens of remains that have been found of people that resided there 2,000 years ago, and they found sanctuary in the ground, something we still do today with bunkers for our high-ranking officials out there in government. But a lot of areas, it looks like, have been converted throughout the ages to burial chambers, to living quarters, that sort of stuff. Now, it is also interesting how, on a more biblical side, Ruben and I have discussed the Nephilim before, and connections to Bigfoot that they may share. But perhaps they found sanctuary underground. You could argue that if a flood did indeed hit to wipe them out, perhaps they barricaded the entryway and fled, using none other than these underground highways. I digress, of course. And is this at all factual? Most certainly not. But the facts that I did want to account for today are as follows. We're dealing with an unprecedented amount of unexplored cave systems, not only in North America and South America, but across the entire planet. These cave systems can connect between mountain ranges, can provide sanctuary to animals, and even cryptids alike. These cave systems can sustain their own ecosystems, untouched by man and other outside forces for thousands of years. These are things I wanted to highlight today because, and I'm going to be hopefully not too blunt, but people live a very narrow tunnel vision life, no pun intended. And this is a life that we coexist with nature on the surface, but that's not all that's really there. It's just a fraction when you think about it. Beneath our feet is a plethora of things just waiting to be discovered. Now, I'm not diving into any specific actual sightings and encounters in this episode, but I wanted to highlight a few things that I've read in the past where a lot of people out in the woods, they stumble upon underground cave systems, and it's not difficult for them to kind of fall into these places. It's just kind of like they're out fishing and they stumble upon some holes in the side of the ground and they can kind of like duck under the shrubbery and the dirt, and you're like, oh, like just all of a sudden pop their head out and they're in this whole underground area here. And that's when they start to realize, hey, something's living here. You look into certain reports, especially with miners, they burrow through and they come into certain chambers like, hey, this seems like something could be here. But it's fascinating what actually is going on beneath our feet and how many people that stumble upon these areas. There's lots and lots of brilliant spots to hide. And people have been doing it for centuries, hiding underground. And it's no different with animals. Smaller animals, of course, that kind of burrow in, like a marmot or foxes making dens and that sort of thing. And that's just the start. When you look at bigger cave systems that kind of open themselves up and you have cryptids like a dogman or a Bigfoot that stumble in there, why would they not take advantage of it? and they got all the time in the world. They can just go through and explore. They don't have to worry about anyone kind of stumbling upon and finding them inside this cave system when you think about it, especially because when you look across the pond back east, there's still so much area over there that is unmapped above the surface. Like, again, we have great technology with cameras and satellites, and we can see a lot of the surface, but when you get below the tree line and you're actually looking at the ground, there's so much more there. When you're dealing with people that go missing in 411 cases, and you have teams going out to set up a grid, this is something I touched upon not too long ago, where team moves forward, and if you watch the missing 401 cases, they actually will reiterate what I'm explaining now. They move forward, they cover a certain square, and they will plant down the stakes and map it out and say, okay, I've covered this square, and they move as a grid and cover grids going along the different forests. Now, not everyone's necessarily going to be looking for a hole in the ground, but especially if perhaps you step on something and moss just falls over top like that. I'm not an expert, but I know that there's probably an insane amount of ways for a cave entrance to be just subtly covered where you might miss it, especially if you're looking for evidence of a person, you're looking for clothing, you're looking for something that stands out. You may not be looking for a hole in the ground. Now, that being said, unless it's a disturbed piece of area, of course, you're going to look into it, but I just think that it's just so easy to get swept away. I mean, if you do fall into a hole and it leads into a cave system, there's so many entrances out there that are just always undiscovered. And it just kind of goes hand in hand with something I love to tell Ruben all the time. If we were driving out to the bush in British Columbia, Canada, and we pull over on the side of the road, you could walk straight off of that highway 10 minutes out there into the bush. You could close your eyes and spin around, and you might not even be able to make it back to the road. I can guarantee you, sure as heck, not everyone on that road driving along a highway is going to be able to look into the tree line and see you either, because it's just ongoing. But I digress. That's all I got for today's episode, however, and I wanted to just kind of tiptoe into the concept of these underground highways and specifically hone in on these underground tunnels and cave networks in Europe and surrounding countries, just to kind of set the stone here for what I'm going to try and do next. I hinted at the beginning of this episode, but I'm going to try and take an introductory step into the Hollow Earth theory in another upcoming episode. Now, when I did the underground highways of North America and those tunnels and just seeing how expansive it was, it blew my mind. And I thought, okay, I've seen how it was received as well online. I thought, okay, so other people are very intrigued by this too. So we're onto something here. So I thought, okay, let's continue this in kind of like a sequel, do Europe and see, okay, what do we got going on over here? And did a little bit of research and found that there's a lot of very fascinating things happening over here, a lot of undisturbed environments and ecosystems as well. So I thought this can only go up into, or below in this case, to Hollow Earth. I've had a few people talking to me actually saying, hey, why haven't you done a Hollow Earth kind of theory yet on the show? You should dive into it. And I know this episode won't be anything too fancy, but just enough to set the playing field. And it's because I won't be able to get Ruben on the show very soon here because he's very busy and our schedules are misaligned, but I know Ruben has a lot of information on this subject. And I may have someone else actually lined up that would be eager to share their thoughts and research with us on the concept of Hollow Earth and information attached to it. And I sure do bet one or two cryptids could be lurking around down there as well. I wouldn't put it past them. But until then, that is it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into some caves across the pond from Canada. And if you've ever been spunking or cave exploring yourself, let us know if you've ever seen anything weird or unusual. CryptidClues@gmail.com. I've gone exploring in a few caves myself, and aside from the light playing tricks on you kind of thing and thinking you're seeing something, like, it's a good time. It's very, very grounded, pun intended kind of experience just to get out there and just really immerse yourself in there. Don't do it if you're claustrophobic. You will not have a good time. That's a disclaimer right here, right now. So yeah, you can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, and again on our Patreon. We get ad-free exclusive early episodes. But until next time, I'm Taylor. Stay safe and take care, everybody.